Do you like sports? Do you like art? What about science? Giraffes? Giraffe scientists that paint rugby games? It's all available on Audible, the biggest audiobook site with the largest selection of audiobooks this side of the inner solar system. No need to use your boring old eyes anymore. The ears are the future, my friend. Why, you're using them right now. So check out Audible and get your listen on. Go to www.readlearnlivepodcast.com/audible to start your 30-day free trial today.
Well, the weird thing is you're putting your life in this little metal box in front of you with this little display, and without that you're screwed. But fortunately, they work and they got us back. But yeah, that journey was quite frightening, if I'm honest.
Hello and welcome to Read, Learn, Live, the podcast about improving yourself through literature. I'm your acclaimed host, Jon Menaster, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 66, where the rest stops are full of cold, cool 7-Ups. As always, if you have ideas for books you'd like to see featured or of authors you want to put me in touch with, you can reach me at jon@readlearnlivepodcast.com. Today, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with author Lindsay McCrae about his book, My Penguin Year. Lindsay McCrae is an award-winning television wildlife camera operator and photographer. Lindsay's passion for wildlife began at an early age. Growing up in the rural Lake District in the north of England, Lindsay has been captivated by all aspects of the natural world since he can remember. Lindsay has been filming wildlife professionally for over 10 years and has traveled all over the world, filming everything from wolves in deep Alaska to orangutans in the Indonesian jungle. In 2017, for almost an entire year, Lindsay lived in Antarctica, isolated from the rest of the world, documenting the lives of a colony of emperor penguins. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to the Read, Learn, Live podcast. I'm your host, Jon Menaster. I am here with Lindsay McCrae. Lindsay, say hello.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for joining me. I'm
No.
really excited to talk with you today. I've got Lindsay's book in my hand here, My Penguin Year, Life Among the Emperors. And it's a fantastic book full of kind of crazy stories about everything that went on during this time down in the Antarctic. But really, I'd like to just kick things off asking you in your own words, what's the book all about? What's the story you're telling?
Well, the story I'm telling is I was given the opportunity a few years ago to spend a year living in Antarctica making a film about emperor penguins. And this was simply a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that I couldn't turn down. So, the film, a lot of people saw the final film when it was broadcast on the BBC, but, a lot of things went on behind the scenes that people aren't aware of. So, I wrote this book to give people an idea of what goes into to making one of these films.
Yeah, and it's a lot. So I think it was quite amazing hearing everything. So I kind of want to start at the beginning, though. Way back when. So you've had a whole career as an award-winning cameraman and photographer. You've done all this stuff. So I feel like writing a book is kind of a totally different beast. So I'm just curious about what gave you the inspiration to take that particular direction with your story?
Yeah, well, I've always wanted to write a book. I enjoyed English at school, and I don't know, there was just something about having a book in my hand that I was like, I wish I could do something like this. And I never, to be honest, never thought I could. But having such a rare opportunity like this to travel somewhere so few people get to go, and spending so long down there and having so much happen while I was there, it was the perfect subject to write about, and enough that I could include and make a book out of. So that was the main thing behind it. It was just such a unique thing to be doing, and I thought I could tell people about it.
Yeah, definitely. So how did you actually put the book together? I mean, it seems like you were taking really detailed notes, and it sounded like you journaled a lot while you were there, but how did you transform all of your notes and thoughts into the actual book?
Well, I had this idea before traveling down. And the main thing when I was down in Antarctica, and this is a big period of isolation where I couldn't get home just purely because the weather is so unpredictable. Um, and I was determined to keep my mind busy while I was there throughout this period, so not to worry about not being able to get home. And I thought, I could maybe write while I was down there and come back with this finished product.
Hmm.
And maybe for the first 3 months, I managed to keep up with it, but it just became too much in the end, and I just couldn't keep on top of it. I'd have to spend all my spare time writing. So I put it to one side, but still kept a detailed diary. Obviously, we had a film at the end of this trip, so perfect material to refresh my memory.
Right.
And yeah, lots of photographs. And because I wrote it only just over a year since I got back. So I got back in the December of 2017 and started writing it in the December of 2018. It was still all relatively fresh, so
Hmm.
it wasn't as tricky as I thought it was going to be, but only really because I had the quantity of material in my mind to put on down on paper.
Right. Yeah, you had so much to work with.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Was there anything that was particularly difficult or hard about telling the story?
Well, I don't think even the pictures that we filmed can do justice to what that place is like. I tried my best writing about how difficult the conditions were to work in and how cold I actually got, and how emotional I was around the birds because I was seeing stuff that people had never seen before.
Hmm.
And also, a lot of things happened with my family while I was away, and yeah, that was tricky. Just trying to convey what it was like down there and what I was feeling. But yeah, I think I've done an okay job, and a lot of people, really do think that, or really do get a decent idea of what Antarctica is like.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. It's yeah, like you said, it's difficult to convey, but I think it's also helpful that you've got the film, so people can read this and watch
Yeah,
everything
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
have that combo, so they can try and it's kind of like a behind the scenes a little bit or a commentary.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's really cool. Cool. Let's go back to the beginnings now because I really enjoyed the start of the book where you talked about what your life was like growing up and kind of how you ended up on this path. So maybe talk a little bit about what your childhood was like and your connection to nature through that.
Well, I think back now, my childhood was just a dream. I was brought up in the Lake District, the northwest of England. I don't know if you've heard of the Lake District, but it's quite a
No.
touristy area in the UK. It's lots of mountains, lots of lakes. And yeah, where I lived, I was only half a mile from the coast, and then in the opposite direction, 7 or 8 miles in that direction, there were mountaintops, and in between, every habitat imaginable, and obviously an enormous amount of wildlife living there. And I, just like every child, had been obsessed with the natural world since I can remember. Unfortunately, that curiosity never left me, and I just spent every spare minute I could outside. And um, I wrote to the BBC when I was just a young teenager, wanting them to come and make a film where I lived because it was so good for wildlife. They couldn't, but they wanted to make a film about me because this was, ooh, blimey, this was 17, 18 years ago now.
Hmm.
And for somebody my age, it was quite a not a weird, but an unusual thing to be doing for somebody my age,
Right.
watching wildlife. All my mates were into football and the typical stuff.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, so the BBC made this film about me, and I used to go and watch a family of badgers just up the lane from where I lived, and spend every evening sitting in this wood with bluebells surrounding me and badger cubs playing around my feet. So it was a kind of weird thing. And so yeah, the BBC made this film about me. I made some contacts and realized that's exactly what I wanted to do. You still don't believe you're ever going to manage to get there, but I suppose I had a half a foot in the door, and having met the right people, and then actually came out of education after at 18, so in the UK after you've done your A levels. So I didn't go to university, but fortunately in that first year out of education, the BBC gave me a job, and all I was doing was making cups of tea and the shopping. But again, I was meeting the right people, and
Right. As a
um,
start.
yeah, and that was it really.
Wow, that's a pretty incredible story. I mean, I think that's very few people can say that they had a show made about them as a child. So,
Yeah, well, it was only 5 minutes, but
oh,
it
okay,
was
it was
it
short
was
but
it was
sweet.
short, but
Yeah,
I think it touched a few people just because I was so young at that point.
right.
And yeah, it just snowballed from there.
Wow. No, that's a great start. And so, as you're now, then you kind of fast forward, and it's the beginning of the book is about, getting ready to go. And you kind of mentioned when I asked about difficulties with the stories, what was going on with your family. And so, I was just kind of amazed at everything that happened with that, and how you were able to keep that relationship going throughout the entire book and the entire time that you were in Antarctica. So, yeah, I mean, maybe just tell us a little bit about your feelings generally. I mean, just as if you were on your own going, that would have been one thing, but then you had all these layers on top of that, and what was that like?
Yeah, well, it was a difficult subject when I first got asked to go because I had a girlfriend at the time. We had a house, we had a couple of dogs, and it was simply an opportunity I just couldn't say no to. But I understood I had, I'd be leaving my girlfriend at home for a year on her own without being able to see her. But it's funny because when we first met working in television, and
Hmm.
she'd asked me what was the thing I'd most love to film, and it was emperor penguins in Antarctica, and she'd never forgotten. So
Hmm.
after a couple of weeks of heavy thinking, she said, you know what, we'll make this work. It's fine. You go and we'll manage. Um, so yeah, and I actually knew 2 years before I went that I was going. There's an enormous amount of preparation involved in a trip like this,
Right.
and yeah, so it was a long time to be thinking, and I'd committed those 2 years before. We obviously had a lot of preparation with training and getting used to the environment that I'd be living in, but also um, Becky and I had we'd always wanted children, and this sort of happened at, I suppose you could say, the wrong time. But with the 2 years preparation and the year I'd be away, that's a 3 year chunk, so a decent amount of time. So it was either, try for children before I went away and see what happens, or wait till I get back, and that would be, at least 3 years down the line. So we thought, you know what, we'll give it a go. And yeah, Becky got pregnant in the August before I'd be leaving in the December. So yeah, our little boy was actually due in April. I'd have been away at that point 4 months. So it was yeah, it was emotionally quite a difficult time, and that month leading up to me leaving was extremely hard. I was waking up
Sure.
thinking, what have I let myself in for here? This isn't just a normal filming trip. This is me being away without being able to see her or any other family for a year. And I really did think maybe I can't handle this. And But I kept the feelings to myself, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's totally normal, right? I mean, it is kind of a crazy endeavor to go on. I think you mentioned at one point in the book how people sometimes like take measurements of people's chemistry or whatever because it's similar to space at points, just in the sense that you're totally secluded and it's a small group of people and there's you're really removed from the world. So yeah, it's just and I think you do a great job of conveying that in the book, just the incredible you know thoughts and fears and concerns that you were having. So I can't imagine what the entire trip would have been like, but I think that's at least I can start to, think to myself, wow, okay, like, what if I was going to do that? How would I feel like? And yeah, I don't know if I would have made it. So
Yeah, it is. It's a funny feeling, that isolation, knowing that there's only the 12 of us together and there's
yeah,
nobody else coming in. And I think it's as close to space as you can get without leaving Earth.
yeah,
Just the environment, but two, the isolation and the people that you're stuck with and that you can't get away from.
right, right. And you really have to trust them, and you talk a lot about that in the book, in terms of like the fire drills and everything that happened. I mean, yeah, who knows?
Yeah,
Um,
look, we got on very well, but you do worry in the back of your mind, what if we do have a falling out, what's going to happen?
Well, yeah, and that's, I mean, it kind of leads to my next question, which is, what were your initial impressions? You went through all this, you decided to plow forward, you said you're going to go, you spent years preparing, and you had all this kit you packed up and came down with, and it was, then you're there. You're after all this preparing, all these years, all this, sleepless nights, you show up. And you start to meet all the people that are going to be there. You get a sense of your surroundings. What first impressions did you have? What did it really feel like when you were on the ground for the first few weeks?
Yeah, well, it was a strange. Well, just actually getting there, that was a strange week because I'd obviously left Becky, my wife. We'd got married actually in the last 6 months before I went. I needed to prove to her that I was worth waiting for, so we got married. And yeah, and then I left on the 16th of December, and we flew via Cape Town in South Africa, and we actually had to wait an extra couple of days. We were there in total about 5 days, I think, because we had to wait for the weather in Antarctica to settle before our plane could actually fly. So it was delayed a little bit, and that was a long, horrible week because that image of her stood on the doorstep in tears, bless, and
oh.
And that was hard. So that first week, I just wanted to get there and just get on with it, and just change my mindset and get on with the job that I had. And until we got there, I found it quite difficult. But when we finally arrived, and there were about 60 people there, it was quite a busy place. Lots of people making sure the station was still in working order. There's lots of mechanics making sure all the machinery is still working. There's a couple of chefs, a cleaner. It's a really busy place because that 4-month summer window is very short for them when people can get in and out. But very quickly realized they were all lovely people. They all worked incredibly hard. We obviously arrived in the middle of summer down there, and we had 24-hour daylight, so the sun was up all day long. So it actually took us it took us about a week for actually our camera kit to arrive because there's been some communication error, and it obviously couldn't get on the plane with us. We had half a ton of camera kit with us, and with only small planes down there, it couldn't fly on the same one as us. So we'd gone ahead of it, and we were waiting for it. It actually arrived on Christmas Day. So we'd managed to do a few trips on the ice, but not actually started filming. But yeah, it was a nice feeling when we finally got there.
Yeah, I'm sure. One thing that you specifically called out and kind of resonated with me was the idea of just connecting with the nature that was there and wanting to watch it and enjoy it. And you honed in on, you saw all these other animals at first, and you mentioned specifically this orca spy hopping behavior, and you talked about how you really wanted to watch it, but you had to capture what was happening on film. It's your job, and it might have prevented you from fully enjoying the moment. And I feel like that happened to me. I used to be way more into taking photos with my fancy camera, and now I'm sort of like, well, but then you're concerned about that and making sure you have the right settings and everything is focused and perfect and whatever the shot you want. And at least for me, I realized that I wasn't able to, be in the moment as much as I wanted to. So I kind of stopped doing that as much. So how do you balance that? How do you deal with that when you're thinking about your filming work, but also your love of nature?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think I've just grown up. Well, in my career since I was 18, I've just learned to live with it. That I feel so fortunate to be in these positions, and I wouldn't be seeing them without my career. But at the end of the day, that's my job, is to record these images, and I tend not to get stressed in these. If I miss something, I don't get. It's wildlife; you can't control it, so. I don't get caught up in a moment if I miss something, and I mean, maybe I should, but yeah, I've just got used to it, and it can be frustrating at times, especially when you're seeing stuff like those orcas. We had about 60 individuals that evening spy hopping around us, and you're just spending the whole time swinging the camera around trying to grab as many shots as possible. And there was another event with an aurora, and those events are only going to happen once or twice you during your whole stay, and you've just got to make the most of them.
Right.
But yeah, part of me would love to have just sat down and enjoyed it without any worries.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, it's amazing that you've built this career for yourself, and you get to go to these places that basically nobody does. I mean, and it's because of your dedication and the time you spent that you get to share this with the rest of the world. So it's definitely worth that.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well then, okay. So all of this happened, all this planning, you got down there, you're seeing all these other animals, but then you finally get taken out and you see the emperors, you see the emperor penguins. And especially like you mentioned, this was kind of your lifelong dream. They were just the highest on the list. And so what was it like? What were the emotions you were feeling? How did you experience that first time actually being in the same space as them, or at least being able to see them?
Yeah, well, this was so strange because I think it's funny, isn't it? Emperor penguins. Everybody on the planet knows what an emperor penguin looks like. They're just, I don't quite know what it is, but everybody loves penguins. Everybody wants to see a penguin, and emperors are just the stereotypical penguin. So, yeah, why I had this dream, I don't know, but yeah, being down there and finally having an opportunity to see one that people do, tourists can see emperor penguins, but it's still very rare. They're the furthest, other than the snow petrel, they're the furthest southerly breeding bird on the planet. They're so remote. It's so expensive to get to the place to see them to start with. So yeah, so when we finally got onto the sea ice, we've been there a few days at this point, and these couple of penguins just tobogganed over to us. A lot of them had probably never seen a human being before, so they've got no reason to fear us. But yeah, I remember just dropping to my knees and making myself small. I say small. If I drop to my knees, the emperors are so big, they'll probably look me in the eye at me being on my knees. They're about 4 foot tall. They're enormous. And yeah, these two tobogganed over to me on their bellies and stood up within touching distance and just bowed their heads. And that trumpet call that everybody knows, just hearing that, I think that was when it clicked. These two birds are in front of me, but when that call came out of its mouth, it just went right through me, and I was just like, wow, we are at the bottom of the planet with one of the most famous animals in the world, and yeah, and I just thought, crikey, this is the next year. This is what we're going to be witnessing every day, or hoping to.
Yeah, no, and it's great, and you get that opportunity to really document their lives, and I think you spent. It's just really interesting to me how your relationship with them evolved over time. And I feel like, you were already kind of in awe of their majesty, but you really started to get connected to them in a much deeper way as you spent more and more time with them. I feel like, and especially like, I think there was, you talked about how you noticed like an all black emperor penguin, and you were able to then like name it and recognize it, and just things like that, where you're able to really start to be, excited about what they were doing and connect with them. So I found that yeah.
We just had this unique opportunity. And I think as wildlife filmmaking goes, what we were given that is so unusual was the time. Usually you go away and you have to hammer it for the month you're away or the 5 weeks you're away. And all right, we had a lot to do. We had to cover the entire life cycle, but we had the whole year to do it, and just being able to come and go when the conditions were right and when the emperors were doing what we wanted them to do. It was just the perfect situation, really, to see what we were wanting to see.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Not rushing things and knowing that you're kind of on their turf, you're on their schedule, to some degree. You're on the Antarctic schedule even. And to that point, you talked at the kind of the beginning of your stay there, once the summer went away and kind of most of the people left, you're down to your small group, and the beginning of the winter didn't quite go as planned, and maybe wasn't as smooth of a start as you hoped. So could you maybe talk about that and kind of how you dealt with that and what you went through?
Yeah, well, we'd had a tricky few months because we turned up in the summer, and the previous few years before we got down there, Atka Bay, where the penguins breed, they breed on sea ice. It's a frozen bay in the sea. Had maintained the ice throughout even the summer, the warmer months, for that 4 years. So we'd expected to get there and be filming the penguins straight away. But overnight that had broken up. The penguins had gone off to sea to feed, and we didn't have anything to film. So that first 4 months, we were just waiting for the sea to refreeze and the birds to return. And they did, and we had to wait another couple of weeks when the colony had formed to make sure the sea ice was safe enough for us to actually venture down onto. And then so that the birds courted and mated, and then we lost the sun for 62 days where we were in that part of Antarctica. And at that point, we still had a lot of behavior to capture in those darker months through the middle of winter, starting with egg laying. And we were filming in really difficult conditions. The heat, the sun doesn't give off much heat when it's out, but when it dips below the horizon, you really do notice the temperatures change. And we were sort of averaging minus 45, and that really took its toll. And we'd spend 5-6 hours on the ice filming each day, and then we'd go back to the station. And all I wanted to do was rest and recover and sleep and prepare for the next day. But with having no sun, it played havoc with my sleep pattern, and I just couldn't go to sleep. And I think we had a doctor on the station. I spoke to him, and something to do with vitamin D and not getting the benefits that sunlight gives you. I was really struggling, and I'd go to bed at 7-8 p.m. and still be lying awake at like 2 a.m. And I was just getting incredibly frustrated because we had a lot to do in those months, even though the conditions were terrible and we didn't have long days. They were short days. We still had a lot to do, and it was quite frustrating. I didn't want us to fall behind. I wanted to make sure we captured everything before it was too late.
Yeah, there was a lot to do. I mean, especially you talk about the whole life cycle. I mean, I think one of the earlier behaviors or the earlier things that you started on was like kind of the courtship part of it all, right? Is how do you find a mate? And the emperors kind of have a new mate every year, so there's a whole new process. And you talk about that, and you filmed that, and how was that? What was it like for you starting to make decisions about how you were going to film things and what you would try and show, and how cooperative were the penguins as you were trying to film them in the middle of this behavior? I mean, how did that go for you?
Well, we had a shopping list, if you like, of the behaviors that we wanted to capture to make our film. But a lot of what happened down there would be key to the final film, because this series was all about animal families, and our animal family was the whole colony. So to bring our film to life, and also Emperor films have been made before. Their story isn't unknown, so we had to try and make it different. But yeah, spending that amount of time with the birds and very quickly getting to know them. Although these key behaviors and what we were after was known, we still had a lot to learn, because you can't just get an idea of what the birds are like from watching a film or two. You've got to spend time with them, and quite quickly we got to know their characteristics and different nuances in behavior that would lead to something else. And it was a constant learning process. We'd made all these plans before going down there about what kit to use when the temperatures were so low, but nothing could prepare us for actually being there in those conditions. So every day was we learned something new and how to make the next day easier.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like just this constant roller coaster ride almost, just when things were breaking, or then you were able to find some jury rig, some like crazy fix or whatever with other pieces, and then a machine might break or your transportation might go down. I mean, it seemed just this like incredible back and forth where everyone is working together really to just try and hold things together as best as possible in this just ridiculously harsh environment. So
yeah, absolutely. And we relied heavily on, so there was myself and a director and a field assistant. That was our team of just 3 people, but we were living with a mechanic, electrician, a doctor, an IT specialist, a chef, and and a bunch of scientists, but we relied heavily on them to make sure that we were, well, one, safe and okay, but two, yeah, that our kit was still working and our transportation. Like you said, if we broke a skidoo, or I broke a skidoo, as I did several times, we relied on the mechanic back at the station to get us back on the road. So, yeah, it was a constant. Things were happening all the time.
Yeah, yeah. What are some of the other behaviors that fascinated you, or were there anything? Did the penguins do anything that you were particularly surprised by?
Well, on this shopping list, we had a couple of key pieces of behavior we didn't think we'd see very much of, but we really wanted to be able to capture them. And one of those was penguins have such strong maternal instincts that they'll brood anything, even if it's not their chick or their egg. And I'd seen previous footage of them like nosing bits of ice around their feet as if they were practicing with an egg, but we came across a couple with a fully sized, a full egg-sized snowball actually on their feet in the brood pouch. That they were, whether they were practicing or they thought it was an egg. So little things like that. We saw a penguin kidnap a chick off another couple. And these are known behaviors, but we got to see them in such detail and right in front of me. We were incredibly lucky because these events, we only saw the once, but what we did see was so vivid and right in front of me and the camera. We did get very lucky with those kind of things. And that, they did form huge parts of the film. The film would have been nothing compared to what it was with these bits of behavior that we managed to capture.
Yeah, it's those kind of incredible bits when they're doing something that's unexpected, I think is what draws people. And especially when you talk about like kidnapping someone else's baby, these kind of shocking behaviors that seemingly are kind of embedded in them, like you said, because of these strong maternal instincts, where maybe that's just like key to their survival. I don't know if you haven't, I mean, you talked in the book about how much reading you did, but do you have a sense of what drives the penguins, what makes them act in certain ways, and was that learning helpful to you as you actually filmed them?
Yeah, definitely. There were certain events which I was extremely keen to capture, just on a personal level. It was like a mini mission for me, because just one example was egg laying, and I'd not managed to see an emperor penguin lay an egg. I'd watched numerous films beforehand. And never actually seen the moment an egg had been hatched. And we had a colony of 11,000 birds, and 5,000 or 6,000 of those would have been males and the same females. So we had a decent chance of being able to capture it, but it all depended on me being able to notice the behavior that led up to egg laying and then lock onto that bird before it actually happened. And the first time a bird laid an egg in front of me, I missed it. It happened so quickly, the camera wasn't even running. And even though we still had another 5,000 females to lay eggs, I thought maybe that's my only chance. And I did get quite angry. I thought, damn, I've missed it. But we did manage to cotton on to the little nuances in behavior and work out which birds were just about to lay and manage to get the camera onto them in time. And yeah, we ended up with shots of that piece of behavior, better if not the only shots that now exist. So without spending the time with the birds beforehand, we probably wouldn't have got that.
Right. I mean, another set of shots that you talk about just sounded really challenging and intense to me is the whole kind of storm chaser element, where you wanted to capture them huddling and you wanted to capture them just fighting against the elements. So that meant you had to go out into the elements and you had to go out into a storm and kind of just hang there and watch the emperors respond. And that was, I think, a big part of the drama to the film. And yeah, how do you prepare for something like that? Just kind of mentally, even just telling yourself that, okay, I'm already in kind of suboptimal conditions, but I'm going to go out knowingly into a storm, where it's going to be even worse. And we have to plan for how we're getting there, getting back and being safe about it, but capturing the penguins fighting against the kind of the harshest moments. How did you imagine that was, something you could do, and how did you prepare yourself to do that?
Yeah, this is one of the sequences that I was most keen to capture, because even scientists in those kind of conditions head back to safety, because it is so dangerous to be out down there during weather like that. I mean, to start with, the visibility goes to zero and you can't even see a couple of feet in front of you. But the payoff is seeing behavior that the birds have evolved to perform, to withstand the conditions down there, and that very few people ever see. So that was the payoff, was getting such unique images. But you're right, it took a lot of planning, because you can't just go out and look for the colony in a massive storm, because you're driving around aimlessly on a frozen ocean. You don't know where the birds are. They'll be in a really tight huddle, which is remarkably small for 5,000 birds packed tight together. You can get about, maximum of 10 birds per square meter when they're really huddled together. So the whole colony takes up a very small bit of space. So the chance of finding them are pretty slim. So we had to be there before a storm hit. And we did have a meteorologist on the station with us who could predict, or had a good go at predicting what weather was coming our way. We got down there for a pretty decent storm, and we got our shots, and we probably stayed a little bit longer than we should have done, but that was my fault. I found the whole thing so exciting. It was the conditions were probably the toughest I'd ever faced on the planet with my career. But just the shots I was getting, I knew the whole thing was so exciting for me. But then obviously you have to remember that we've got to get home. We've got to get back to the station, which was a skidoo journey of about 7 or 8 kilometers, which on a good day you can do in 10 minutes. You can see the station. It's just there. It's a flat landscape. You can see it from the penguins. And even though you're 8 kilometers away, it just looks within touching distance. It's nothing. But in a storm, that 10-minute journey took us just shy of 3 hours, and we just relied on our GPSs. The three of us together would skidoo in a line, trying to keep it in sight of each other. And it was a tricky few hours, and you do get scared, you do get frightened. You're thinking, well, the weird thing is you're putting your life in this little metal box in front of you with this little display, and without that, you're screwed. But fortunately, they work and they got us back. But that journey was quite frightening, if I'm honest.
One thing I wanted to check in on throughout all of this, all of this amazing time you're spending with the penguins, like you mentioned earlier, your wife was pregnant and gave birth to your son. And I was just curious about how you dealt with that, what your connection to them was like while you were in Antarctica, and what that meant to you.
Yeah, well, we at the station, we were quite lucky. We had, it's one of the most sophisticated stations on Antarctica. It was built in 2009, so it's quite a modern building, and they do have very good satellite internet. And that was my way of keeping in touch. I effectively had like a landline phone in my room, and one thing that made a huge difference actually was we were the same time zone, which seems strange, but from the UK and Cape Town, we were straight down. So I've been on much shorter trips where I've been 9 hours ahead or behind, and that's been quite tricky. But being on the same time zone definitely helped. I'd not actually I'd told my two colleagues who I was at the station with, but I'd not told my bosses at the BBC about Becky being pregnant for fear of them pulling me off the project, thinking Lindsay can't deal with this. We better not send him. So I kept that to myself. And I think from mentally my side of things, what made things easier was this was Becky and my first child. We had no experience of this beforehand, so we didn't know what we'd got ourselves into. So our first experience was going to be this one, so we had nothing to compare it to. Walter was actually born the day, or the first few days that the penguins started returning in the April, and I got a radio call. I told the doctor maybe a week or so beforehand, so he could receive a call from Becky's mum in case things happened, and he radioed us down on the ice, and I shot back and logged onto Skype, and within 30 seconds, little Walter was born. So it was a strange, it was strange, and if I'm honest, it was tricky because I wasn't there and I wasn't feeling the same emotions, and it didn't quite feel real. If you get me, it's
like you're watching a show or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I was 15,500 kilometers away, and all I had in front of me was this little computer screen. So I couldn't touch him, or I couldn't see Becky's emotions really. It was amazing, but it was strange at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that all worked out. I mean, that you were able to have that connection and to be able to at least see everything happening. And I know you talk about in the book how Becky was living with her parents, and that really helped, for her to have some support while you were away. So it sounds like you guys, prepared, made plans, and were able to make do. So
yeah, we're a strong couple. We're certainly a lot stronger now than we thought we were, but I'm very lucky with Becky, now Walter's, he's 2.5 now, and I mean, it'll be a big part of his growing up, but it's certainly done me our relationship's no problem with me being away for the first 7 months. Yeah.
And I know that, you'll have a kind of a crazy story to tell him, and, about the circumstances and all that.
I'm sure he'll use it against me at some point.
Right. That's okay. So one other story I definitely wanted to talk about, because I found it pretty amazing, was the kind of penguin rescue operation story that you got into. And, I was doing a little research, and so you talk about this in the book, how you had to you decided to save, kind of intervene and save penguins. And then I saw it also made it on the show, even like what you guys did, which was surprising to me, because you seemed very nervous about making that decision. So yeah, maybe tell that story and how that actually ended up being in the film.
Yeah, well, this was mid-September, I think, and we'd been with the birds or the colony almost 10 months at this point. So we were very close to them. We'd spent every minute of every day out with them. We'd gone through almost everything with them. And we were well into chick hatching, the period where the chicks hatch at this point. There were lots of youngsters in the colony, eggs still hatching. And we had the biggest storm all year. It was a storm which lasted well over 2 weeks. We couldn't even open the front door of the station. It was that bad. And when we got back down to the birds, it was just carnage. There were just, chicks everywhere. There were parents that were looking for their chicks. There were chicks running around that had lost their parents. There had been quite a lot of fatalities. There was some huge gullies and ravines that had been made throughout the storm and the wind, and some of these birds had been blown into these gullies and couldn't get themselves out. So we spent the first day filming. Obviously, our job was to film what happened, and this was such a unique event. Certainly, something we didn't expect to see. Something that we didn't even know happened with emperors. Certainly, not on this scale. And very quickly, we realised that birds that didn't have a chick on their feet could scale these walls with their strong claws and their beak as like an ice axe with no problem. They were going up and down like you wouldn't believe. So straight away we were filming behavior that we thought emperors weren't capable of. But very quickly we realized that these birds had to make a horrendous choice, and they'd simply deserted their chicks at the bottom to save themselves. Because birds that were still shuffling along with chicks on their feet and having to keep them warm couldn't use their feet to the full effect and couldn't climb up the walls. So we were actually forced back to the station for a day, and while we were there, we had a long chat, and we decided that if the situation was the same when we got back to them, we'd try and intervene. And you're right, people see that as controversial, and should we or shouldn't we? But this was a really, really unique situation. At this time of year, emperors are the only creature in Antarctica. Everything else flees, and one of the reasons they breed throughout the Antarctic winter is to avoid predators. But I suppose on the other hand, the weather is their big predator. So it wasn't as if they'd been chased into this hole by a leopard seal or another predator, and nor would penguins dying at the bottom of this gully benefit any other life form, because there was nothing there. These birds would simply get buried, and that'd be that. So we weren't affecting the balance here of the food chain. So yeah, we decided to step in, and indirectly we gave them the helping hand. We dug into the slope to give them a ramp to walk up, to shuffle up with their chicks still on their feet. So all we did was give them an option. They didn't have to use it, but very luckily they knew what we'd done, and they very quickly took advantage and saved themselves. So yeah, it was an intense couple of days, but I think, well, deep down, I know we made the right decision.
Right. And how did it end up actually being a part of the program? I mean, how was that decision made?
Well, I'm not involved with that part of the program. Once I've filmed, I hand over my material, and it's down to the people to make something of it. But we definitely pushed for it because it was such a big part of our year. And in the actual film, we did cover the ravine and birds stuck down there. So viewers definitely wanted to know what happened to those other birds, because we'd only covered one individual which managed to save herself and her chick. But she was the only one that managed to do that. And the others, their sort of story was left unfinished. So it made sense to go back to it in the section about how we made the film. And it made perfect sense. And people eventually were told the final part of the story about us giving them a helping hand. Yeah.
No, I'm sure people appreciated closing that loop, so that's great. So yeah, kind of just to kind of close out this story, eventually you finished, you spent this whole period with them. You captured an enormous range of behaviors. You were down in the Antarctic forever, for a long time. And then that was kind of it. And you had to pack up, and, even in the book, you talk about how things ended up happening a lot more quickly than you thought. There was an earlier plane, and you just kind of, everything sped up, and then all of a sudden you're heading back home. So what was it like making that transition from sort of total isolation in Antarctica to, the reality that basically the rest of the planet lives, and, just, hanging out, taking the car, going to get food, just all that stuff.
Yeah, it was strange because we'd spent, well, at this point, 11 months with just 12 other people. I'd not seen a car. I'd not seen another bird other than the emperors. I'd not seen a car. You're right. So that transition, I'd done some research on this because it was a bit I was worried about returning back to normality. I got very used to the easy way of life down there, and it proved tricky leaving in the end. I was desperate to get home. I had my little boy to meet for the first time. He was 7 months old. Becky, my wife, I'd not seen for 11 months. Was desperate to see her. But on the other hand, I got so used to life down there. Money doesn't exist. Time doesn't exist. There are no borders. So if you do need help, usually another nationality that owns a station would come to your rescue without thinking about it. So it's a pretty cool place to be, and obviously you're breathing the purest air on the planet. There's no light pollution, there's no noise pollution, there are no problems basically. And you're back into the normal life at literally the click of a fingers. You are told the weather's good for the next couple of days, there's a plane on its way, pack your bags, you're off. So I we got that first plane that actually all it was doing was coming past our station to refuel, and we jumped on it to get a lift to a neighbouring station, which is where we got our international flight back. And within 48 hours, I was back in the UK. But I think I wasn't given much of a chance to think about life back home because I was thrown straight into parenthood and being a father, which was the best distraction for me, really. I think had I not had Walter to look after straight away, I'd have really had a difficult few months, a really depressing few months, just remembering what life was like down there. But
Right.
I wasn't given that opportunity to think, which I'm grateful for because I do think I'd have struggled. But yeah,
Sure.
fortunately, I just had him to look after, so it took my mind off things.
Oh, well, that worked out well. Um, cool. Well, just to wrap things up, is there anything else you were hoping people would get from this book? Is there any other parts of the story that you really want people to understand?
Well, there's one thing I mentioned very briefly at the end of the book, and only in these past few years really has this happened. And the second largest colony of emperors in Antarctica, well, the second largest colony in the world of emperor penguins has collapsed because they rely on a frozen ocean. And for the past couple of years, these 20 plus thousand birds have bred, but not managed to raise a single chick. And it barely hit headline news here in the UK. I don't know about in America, but I think that's a huge warning for the future of our whole planet. You know, Antarctica is going to be the first to be affected, and therefore the emperors.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty shocking wake up call to get people to start thinking really that things are changing. And I wish it was bigger news really, because everybody knows, you know, like I mentioned earlier, everybody knows an emperor penguin and where they breed, but not many people know that the second largest colonies is now no more.
Yeah, that's pretty horrible, and yeah, that's not good. So definitely something to keep in mind, and definitely something to remember about Antarctica, and I think that's part of the power of going down there and filming them, and having this book and talking about them is that you're doing your part to kind of keep them in the public's eye and in the public's mind, because yeah, it's not a story that we're seeing so much. Yeah, just as you mentioned, it's not really happening so much in America either. Not something, for whatever reason,
Yeah.
the news wants to talk about, unfortunately. All right. Well, so I know that you've got that this happened a bit ago. So what all is going on with your career right now? What are you doing? Where are you at? What are some things you're excited about?
Well, I've been away a fair bit. I took a bit of time off when I got back.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually had Becky and I've had another little boy. We've got a little Ernest now who's only
Oh,
7 months old. So
well, congratulations.
thanks. And
Yeah.
our hands are full at the moment. But yeah, no, I've still been away a fair bit. Um, there's one more trip for me this year to Japan, and then we'll see what happens next year. But yeah, there's so much going on at the moment with Netflix, with Apple TV, obviously the BBC and Amazon. Everybody's making wildlife programs, so it's a great time to be working in the industry,
Yeah.
and traveling around and showing people, what we've got on our planet. Because I don't think there's been a better time to be pushing these stories. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens next year. But there's lots going on at the moment.
Yeah. 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 Well, good. I'm glad you're busy. Cool. Well, let's do a quick thunder round. I always like to end on some getting to know you questions, and then we'll call it a day. Sound
Brilliant.
good?
Yes.
All right. Okay. What is your favorite food and or drink?
Favorite drink is Earl Grey tea. I'm British.
Of course. Yeah, you're British. Got it.
And I quite like Battenberg cake. Do you have that in the US?
I don't, you mentioned that in the book. I actually don't know what that is.
No, it's like a yellow and pink sponge surrounded by marzipan.
Okay.
But the two together are pretty unbeatable.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. Well, I mean, I already know the answer to this, but where's your favorite place you've ever been?
Well, you do, obviously, Antarctica. However, I'm just going to mention the Pantanal in Brazil is probably the most diverse place I've been. The life out there. I did a month filming a couple of years ago, filming giant armadillos, but everything else that we saw was just magic. It was an incredible place.
Wow. That sounds amazing. All right, last question. If you could wave a magic wand and change any one thing, what would it be and why?
Um, it would have to be, I think, the past couple of thousand years of humans being on this planet. I'd love to have a walk around and see what the place was like back then, and if we knew what damage we were doing, we could have maybe gone about it a different way. But yeah, it would definitely be have a walk around a couple of thousand years ago. It would probably depress me knowing how much is now here now compared to back then. But yeah, that would be that answer.
All right. No, fair enough. All right. Well, for everyone listening, in case you haven't figured out already, this is an absolutely amazing book chronicling the trip that probably no one else will ever get to take, or very few people will ever get to take and spend time with these amazing creatures. So, watch the film, but more importantly, read this book, My Penguin Year: Life Among the Emperors. See the behind the scenes of everything. It was, yeah, just incredible. So, Lindsay, thanks so much for joining me.
No, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Read, Learn, Live. If you liked it, tell a friend and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. If you hated it, tell a friend and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. And so it goes.